As I announce at every session, we will be swearing all witnesses that come before us. And so, consistent with that, I'd like all of you to please stand and be sworn that the testimony you are about to provide the Commission will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, to the best of your knowledge. Mr. Theobald.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today about the Miami-Dade Police Department's effort to combat mortgage fraud. Facing a wave of mortgage fraud investigations, Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Alvarez established the Mayor's Mortgage Fraud Task Force in September of 2007. This public-private partnership uses a comprehensive approach that blends legislative change, prevention, enforcement, regulation, and prosecution to reduce mortgage fraud and prevent victimization of individuals and businesses. According to FinCEN, mortgage fraud is one of the fastest-growing white-collar crimes in the United States. From 2006 to 2007, Florida held the dubious distinction of ranking first in the nation in mortgage fraud. According to the Mortgage Asset Research Institute, otherwise known as MARI, Miami-Dade County in particular leads the state in incidents of mortgage fraud and ranks in the top 5 major metropolitan areas hit by that crime. The number of suspicious activity reports from financial institutions reported by FinCEN more than tripled from 2004, when there was over 17,000, to over 64,000 in 2008, and it's closing in on 70,000 in 2009. MARI estimates that 70 to 80% of all those foreclosures contain some type of mortgage fraud, so it seems clear that foreclosures and mortgage fraud are intertwined to some degree. In both 2007 and 2008, Florida ranked second in the nation in foreclosures, with Miami-Dade again being the hardest hit area in the state. Traditionally, the FBI and the HUD Inspector General's office handled mortgage fraud investigations. In many areas, though, the FBI's threshold for handling these cases is set at certain dollar amounts, and cases that fall below these thresholds must be handled at a local level. The FBI Miami office, for instance, had a $1 million threshold that close to 98% of all the cases did not meet. So compounding that problem, that was the fact that no state statute existed to address mortgage fraud as a crime, and local law enforcement investigators and prosecutors did not have sufficient knowledge, experience, or training in taking on mortgage fraud cases. In addition, the combination of questionable mortgage industry professionals, the lack of appropriate resources for state regulators to accomplish the legal mandates of their office, and the relaxed lending requirements by lending institutions led to a rapid increase in mortgage fraud that has had a detrimental effect on Miami-Dade County, the state of Florida, and the entire country. Our response in Miami-Dade, because local law enforcement had lacked the authority and the ability and the tools to investigate and charge subjects with mortgage fraud, the task force drafted and lobbied for the passage of a Florida state statute which allowed local law enforcement throughout the state to arrest perpetrators for the crime of mortgage fraud. This legislation formed the cornerstone of the task force. Nevertheless, a multifaceted approach was necessary because the mortgage fraud crisis was not created by one or two different components gone wrong, but an entire breakdown of the real estate industry. To address the various strategies for reducing mortgage fraud, the Miami-Dade Police Department consulted key stakeholders, including county and state elected officials, leaders of local government, business executives, law enforcement professionals, prosecutors, and we formed 5 committees. The first committee was the Law Enforcement Committee that's responsible for detecting, investigating, apprehending, and prosecuting mortgage fraud subjects and enterprises. The committee comprises largely investigators and supervisors from the Miami-Dade Police Department's Economic Crimes Bureau. Our Economic Crime Bureau detectives work with other local, state, and federal law enforcement to solve cases and apprehend subjects. The State Attorney General's Office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office prosecute the cases in the respective courts. The Legislative Committee, which enhances current laws, creates new laws and ordinances. Several of the task force members are state legislators who have assisted in sponsoring and passing state laws to achieve the task force's goals. The Regulatory Committee, which enhances and enforces state regulation on all parties involved in a mortgage transaction. The Business Partnership Committee, which creates and transmits effective business practices and an ethical code of conduct to enhance cooperation with law enforcement and different professions involved in a mortgage to attack the problem and stop fraudulent loans from actually being written. And an education component, which helps law enforcement, prosecutors, and industry professionals build awareness about mortgage fraud through extensive community visibility and guest speaking events, news conferences for major sweeps, arrests, and new legislation. To date, Mayor Alvarez's Mortgage Fraud Task Force is one of the few public-private task forces at the county level in the entire United States, and it has a tremendous impact on the way mortgage fraud has been viewed in Florida. The Law Enforcement Committee has shouldered a number and a lot of the burden in achieving this goal. To date, there have been several thousand reports and inquiries, and currently 682 investigations are active. The Economic Crimes Bureau has made more than 189 felony arrests for mortgage fraud and related charges, which represent more than $60 million in losses. We have created a training manual and trained more than 400 investigators and prosecutors in the state of Florida. As far as legislation goes, the Legislative Committee crafted new legislation and enhanced the current mortgage fraud statute, which was sponsored by our State Representative Carlos Lopez-Cantera and our State Senator Gwen Margolis. These bills were signed into law by Governor Christ and effective July 1st of 2008. They enhanced the law enforcement ability to notify the county property appraiser's office when an affected property has shown mortgage fraud and there's probable cause that a mortgage fraud occurred. And this is important because the property appraiser's office is now required to reevaluate not only the affected property, but the properties around that particular home or that condominium. And this will reduce the taxes and has reduced the taxes of all the properties affected by the fraud. Not only the individual property, but everyone involved in the scheme. The bill also created a second-degree felony for the mortgage fraud that occurs over $100,000. In 2008, at the federal level, House Resolution 6853, the Nationwide Mortgage Fraud Task Force Act of 2008, sponsored by Congressman Kendrick Meek, was passed in the House of Representatives, and it was amended as the Nationwide Mortgage Fraud Coordinator Act of 2008. It unfortunately ran out of time in the Senate, but was filed again on January 14th of 2009 as H.R. 529, the Nationwide Mortgage Fraud Task Act of 2009. The legislation sought to create a nationwide program modeled after Miami-Dade's Mortgage Fraud Task Force to address mortgage fraud in the United States. On May 20th of 2009, President Obama signed Public Law 111-22, a sense of Congress encouraging the creation of a nationwide Mortgage Fraud Task Force Act. The act, which was Senate 896, was sponsored again by Congressman Meek and Senator Bill Nelson, both of Florida. As far as regulation goes, following the recommendations of the Task Force's Regulatory Committee, the Florida Office of Financial Regulation and the Department of Business and Professional Regulation enacted regulations to expedite emergency hearings to suspend the licenses of real estate agents and mortgage brokers involved and arrested for mortgage fraud or other related fraud. The immediate suspension will prevent the agent or broker from victimizing unsuspecting home purchasers. Regulations also required background checks and licensure for all loan originators. Additionally, a complete overhaul of the state statute regulating the mortgage industry was in this year's legislative package. The Business Partnership Committee created Real Estate Best Practices Manual to distribute to Miami-Dade County realtors. The committee also sought and received private funding from Florida bankers and other professions involved in the mortgage business to assist in financing the costs involved in investigating and prosecuting mortgage fraud. The Education Committee has created a public complaint form with website access to report mortgage fraud, and it's on the Mayor's website. There is also an established database of speakers available to appear at engagements and speak on behalf of the task force. Additionally, an aggressive media campaign to educate the public and prevent victimization has been undertaken. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the task force is committed to making a difference in the quality of life of the citizens of Miami-Dade County by reducing the number of incidents of mortgage fraud. Although this is a tremendously large problem in the United States, the steps have been taken in Miami-Dade can be duplicated elsewhere in Florida and throughout the country. The task force's comprehensive multidisciplinary approach that has proven to be successful in Miami-Dade County is being sought as a model for attacking mortgage fraud in the United States. The Mortgage Fraud Task Force and its accomplishments can provide a solution to the national financial crisis. With the task force model, hard work and perseverance by dedicated public servants and industry professionals can unravel the mess that was created by greedy lenders and fraudsters. I look forward to working with you and other members of the committee on solving this serious threat to our nation's economy. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to taking your questions.